Good afternoon, and welcome to the first E-Commerce Caucus briefing of 2021, Public-Private Partnerships, a spotlight on anti-counterfeiting solutions. I'm Frank Cullen. I work with the Global Innovation Policy Center at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Some of you may know that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is the leading advocate for business in Washington, D.C., and we work both here on domestic issues and also internationally to ensure that our economy remains strong, that there are more jobs created, and we support those important industries that do so much to really ensure American competitiveness. I think most of you know that the Chamber cares deeply about the U.S. economy and our very important innovative industry sectors. And we have dedicated an entire department, the Global Innovation Policy Center, to supporting those policies that really encourage and advance the correct policies to support these innovative industries. Now, many of you already know that the E-Commerce Caucus really represents the interests of members of Congress who are really supporting the great work that's being done in our innovative sector. And nothing's more innovative these days than being able to shop, work, and connect online. And of course, most of you have probably had some kind of an e-commerce transaction, if not today, sometime in the last week or recently. And e-commerce has done so much to reshape the way America does business and how consumers interact with companies. So it's very important that today we're taking a deeper look at the role of public-private partnerships and how we're going to try and avoid the counterfeiting issues that present issues related to our national security and also, of course, the pervasiveness of global counterfeiting networks, all of which cause tangible harm to U.S. citizens and businesses. This topic is really of the utmost importance, and particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. A notable example is when federal agents seized approximately 10 million Chinese-made counterfeit N95 face masks bearing the 3M logo. So that's a real threat to the health and safety of Americans and our healthcare workers. And ultimately, when working to combat bad actors, a lack of coordination can undermine the effort's effectiveness. And that's why we at GIPC strongly believe information sharing creates joint opportunities to target organized criminals and illicit trade. Now I'd like to move the program forward and provide introduction to the E-Commerce Caucus chairs. We're very grateful for the leadership both members of Congress have provided for this important caucus, and it's really my honor and distinct privilege to have the opportunity to introduce them before we're hearing their comments. U.S. Representative Pete Aguilar represents the 31st Congressional District of California and serves on the House Appropriations Committee, where he holds the leadership position of Vice Chair of the House Democratic Caucus. Pete Aguilar was most recently elected in 2020, but prior to his role in Congress, he served as the mayor of Redlands, where he earned a reputation for his bipartisanship and steadfast commitment to making his commitment to a better place to live, work, and raise a family for the people of Redlands. And I can tell you, as someone who lived in the Inland Empire of California and am familiar with Representative Aguilar before he came to Congress, he's a great leader and a terrifically dedicated public service. In addition to Representative Aguilar, we're delighted to be able to introduce Representative Brett Guthrie, who represents Kentucky's 2nd Congressional District. He serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee and is the top Republican on the Energy and Commerce Committee's Health Subcommittee. And during my time working on the Hill, I had the opportunity to see firsthand what a great leader Congressman Guthrie is on so many issues that fall within the province of the important Energy and Commerce Committee. So I want to thank both of these fine representatives for their leadership and their commitment to these important issues, and also for taking time today to be with us and share their thoughts. In addition to his work on the Energy and Commerce Committee's Health Subcommittee, Representative Guthrie also serves on the Communications and Technology Subcommittee and the Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee, which have great relevance to today's conversation. And now it's my real honor to turn the program to Representative Pete Aguilar.
Hi, I'm Congressman Pete Aguilar. My district, located in Southern California's Inland Empire, relies heavily on e-commerce to help drive our local economy. As a major shipping and logistics hub, this industry supports thousands of good-paying jobs. and those jobs wouldn't exist without the manufacturers and small business owners who drive the e-commerce industry. That's why I'm so concerned with the rise in counterfeit goods. In the past few years, it's become increasingly clear that the sale of counterfeit goods represents an urgent threat to the e-commerce industry in the United States and our economy as a whole. As the co-founder of the Congressional E-Commerce Caucus, I'm committed to working with my colleagues to address this issue. By working with the Department of Homeland Security, we can do more to stop the import of counterfeit goods to protect American sellers and manufacturers. Please know that I'll continue to work on this issue with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I'm grateful for your attention to this issue and for your continued partnership.
My name is Congressman Brett Guthrie, and I'm proud to represent the 2nd District of Kentucky. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share remarks for this e-commerce briefing. I want to thank the panelists for discussing the importance of product protection in the e-commerce space while also finding solutions to combat counterfeiting online. This Congress, I'm involved with e-commerce policy as the co-chair of the E-Commerce Caucus and as a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee's Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee. America is a global leader in the development of digital economy. So as online commerce increases, the e-commerce industry will become even more vital for consumers, job creators, and small businesses. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, intellectual property supports 81 industries and 45 million jobs that are tied to the use of patents, copyrights, or trademarks. However, counterfeit goods threaten our economy. Each year, 750,000 jobs are lost as a result of the production of fake goods. Now more than ever, it is critical to have these conversations. Since the COVID-19 pandemic began, deceptive marketing, counterfeit products, and scammers targeting America's most vulnerable have been on the rise. We held a Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee hearing in February on how to protect American consumers amid frauds and scams during the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to place an emphasis on encouraging public and private sector collaboration to protect small business owners and consumers from harmful, unsafe, or even unapproved products. Thank you again for being here today and your interest in finding solutions and best practices to end counterfeiting.
You can see we're quite fortunate to have two such dedicated leaders as Congressman Aguilar and Guthrie sharing their remarks with us today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Kasie Brill. Kasie leads our work on e-commerce issues and against counterfeiting at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Global Innovation Policy Center. And Kasie is going to lead our panel discussion. Kasie?
Well, thank you very much, Frank. I'm really pleased to join you this afternoon to moderate the discussion really focused on public-private partnerships as it relates to counterfeiting. As we all know, retailers have really significantly expanded their online marketplace capabilities, and trends show that people are increasingly comfortable and will do much more purchasing online of regular necessities, including groceries, cleaning products, cosmetics, and even medicines, and including streaming their creative content online. This also means, though, that counterfeiters and pirates have picked up on these trends, and consumers are really more vulnerable than ever to inadvertently purchase a counterfeit or a pirated good. In May, just as background, the Chamber signed and entered into a first-of-its-kind partnership, a memorandum of understanding with U.S. Customs and Border Protection around information sharing specifically. This really further demonstrates the importance and the efficacy behind public-private partnerships. Now I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists for this afternoon. First, Dr. Jay Kennedy. He's an assistant professor jointly appointed to the School of Criminal Justice and the Center for Anti-Counterfeiting and Product Protection at Michigan State University. In this role, he is actively involved in research, education, and outreach efforts that focus on external partners, including corporations, industry associations, and law enforcement agencies too. His work is interdisciplinary in nature, and his published research has appeared in a number of outlets, including the American Behavioral Scientist, Criminal Justice Review, Journal of Crime and Justice, Journal of Financial Crime, and Security Journal, and victims and offenders. Next, Travis Johnson. Travis is Vice President of Legislative Affairs and Senior Counsel at the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition. In this role, he oversees all aspects of IACC's government relations and policy development functions in North America and serves as the IACC's primary lobbyist in Washington. He also takes part in the organization's relations with international governments, association partners, and leads the development of IACC's MOUs. In addition, he serves as a senior in-house attorney, and he advises the organization on a variety of corporate matters. He also is the principal author of a criminal trademark legislation that was enacted by 6 states. He's testified before a number of state legislatures and in front of the U.S. House of Representatives, and has the Herculean task of overseeing IACC's Special 301 submission to USTR. And lastly, Kasie Smith is a senior corporate counsel with Amazon's Counterfeit Crimes Unit. Here, he works with a team of lawyers, investigators, and analysts to target bad actors who sell counterfeit goods on the Amazon store. The CCU's mission is to target counterfeiters by using external enforcement efforts, such as joint criminal referrals and civil lawsuits against infringers. These efforts are often jointly conducted with rights owners, but the CCU will also pursue action unilaterally when called for. Prior to joining Amazon, Kasie worked as a senior trial attorney with the Computer Crime Intellectual Property section of the United States Department of Justice. Many of you may have interacted with him in this role. And at CSIPs, he worked as an AUSA from across the country and prosecuted trademark and copyright infringers and trade secret thieves using federal criminal statutes. He was also trained both domestic and foreign law enforcement on IP enforcement techniques, on evidence collection, and the use of electronic evidence at trial. Before his work at CSIPs, Kasie worked at DOJ's Executive Office for U.S. Attorneys, serving as the white-collar coordinator. And he began his career in 2008, where he worked as an AUSA for 6 years, prosecuting bank robberies, healthcare fraud, civil rights, and intellectual property violations, among others. You can tell we have a great set of panelists for our discussion today. So without any further commentary, I would like to invite Professor Kennedy to offer his perspectives on the current state of affairs of counterfeiting and its nexus to public-private partnerships. Thanks, Dr. Kennedy.
Thank you very much, Kasie. I really appreciate that. And thank you to the GIPC at the U.S. Chamber for inviting me to give some comments. The current state of counterfeiting, as Frank mentioned earlier, has really been shifted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this really gets highlighted by work that's been done by some of my colleagues at the Association for Safe Online Pharmacies, which found that people are increasingly going online to buy regulated goods such as pharmaceuticals, but generally from places that are not safe to buy from. The opportunities are ubiquitous, and the fact that they have positive interactions has meant that they will likely continue to purchase online. And so prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw this general increasing uptick in the number of people who were going online for the first time to buy, as well as those who would continue to buy products online. COVID exacerbated that increase, and that growth has been, I believe, 14% from 2019 to 2020, and it's expected to continue to grow. The share of retail sales that occurs online is only going to increase, which means that more and more consumers will be exposed to bad actors such as counterfeiters in this online space. And so how do we address this issue? One way is to increase the value and the impact of public-private partnerships by supporting data sharing initiatives. Right now, there are multiple players who have a stake in the safety and security of online commerce. Each of those players collects data. They collect information about potential bad actors, about cases that have been prosecuted, about incidents of product counterfeiting and other forms of illicit trade that overlap with product counterfeiting. But there's not an efficient mechanism whereby that data can be shared, analyzed, and then turned into practices that can create efficient and effective anti-counterfeiting, anti-illicit trade activities. Comprehensive strategies to address the threat that is posed to consumers, to governments, to society generally by online counterfeiting and online illicit trade cannot be achieved unless we have a mechanism whereby these data and information can be shared and joint, collective, proactive public-private partnerships can be developed that implement strategic objectives that are aimed at mitigating these risks. The history of product counterfeiting tells us that it is not going away. It's been around for 3 to 4 millennia. It will not go away anytime soon. It is a fool's errand to say that we can eliminate counterfeiting by passing legislation or by taking action by platforms or by brand owners having more engagement in this area. It's going to take everyone in this fight to address this issue. It's also going to take us learning lessons from other areas of illicit trade so that we can apply these tactics that we have seen other bad actors use to emerging issues that are happening in the space of product counterfeiting. These crimes don't exist in a vacuum. The bad actors who engage in product counterfeiting, in many cases, engage in other forms of intellectual property rights violations or other crimes generally. And so as this space develops, we need a mechanism to pull that partnership together. Importantly, and specifically for this group, we need to consider the role that oversight, regulation, and legislation will play in either enforcing or forcing compliance and standards, or enacting and supporting existing partnerships. The latter is likely to be more effective. And so as we look forward to the future of e-commerce, what needs to develop is an environment wherein the regulatory structure is supported by public and private players that both have a vested interest in this problem, that come together to craft legitimate solutions, and that have the weight of legislation behind them to take action against players who are violating the standards of right practice in this space. This means bringing in sellers and regulating the selling process, the sales process, but also empowering private partners with the ability to share data and to utilize data and information to take action against bad actors on their own, as well as in concert with other public entities. And so I would hope that from this, we see more discussion around ways that we can engage in very efficient data sharing, but also around collective action aimed at addressing counterfeit products. Thank you very much, Kasie. I really appreciate the time to share my thoughts with you.
Thanks so much, Professor Kennedy, and we'll come back to you for some questions in a moment. We'd now like to hear from Travis Johnson from the IACC. Thanks, Travis.
All right. Thank you, Kasie, for the introduction. And thank you to Congressman Aguilar and Congressman Guthrie and all the members of the E-Commerce Caucus for the opportunity to join you here today. This program and its topic really could not be more timely, and appreciate everybody taking time out of their schedules. The growth of e-commerce over the past 25 years has impacted virtually every aspect of our lives. And while it has undoubtedly provided huge benefits for all of us, the speed and the magnitude of that change has led to some growing pains in a number of areas, for lack of a better term, that is definitely the case when it comes to protecting and enforcing IP rights. Would like to start by just providing a little bit of context regarding the challenges that we're facing in keeping illicit goods out of the marketplace, both online and in the brick and mortar context. So on an annual basis, approximately 800 million shipments valued at around $2.5 trillion into the United States through any one of over 300 ports. A relatively small percentage of those shipments involve counterfeit goods, which is the good news. Unfortunately, the bad news is that a relatively small percentage of 800 million shipments, or $2.5 trillion, still equates to a huge problem with a massive price tag for American businesses and consumers. In fiscal year 2020, Customs seized nearly 24,000 shipments of counterfeit goods that arrived at the border via small packages, international mail or express delivery shipments. And those account for approximately 90% of CBP's total seizures by volume. And that's a trend line that we've seen grow with the rise of e-commerce. It's not, simply the case of, large scale cargo container size shipments coming in. And the downside of that is that the amount of time and the effort that it takes CBP to process those small packages of 1 to 2 counterfeit items is roughly equivalent to the effort that it takes for them to process an entire container load seizure. So it significantly decreases the efficiency of enforcement, and that's one of the challenges that we're looking to address. As it's continuing to grow, as technology has improved to allow counterfeiters to more easily produce, market, distribute fakes to consumers around the world, and in the U.S. in particular, the strain on our enforcement resources has grown exponentially. To some extent, though, our legislative and regulatory frameworks and the strategies that have served us well over the years have lagged behind those developments in the trade landscape, leading us to the state of affairs that we're currently in. So, now that I've painted this sort of gloomy picture about the present situation, I think we, often want to ask, what can we do about it? And, a lot of people's initial reaction is something along the lines of, well, if CBP's got strained resources, let's get CBP some more resources. And what most people really mean by that is, we should hire more personnel to examine cargo containers and to open up packages and take a look inside. And additional resources are always nice to have, but the idea that we can simply throw more manpower at the problem and seize our way out of the trafficking of counterfeit goods is, to be frank, delusional. But we can be smarter about how we use the resources that are already at our disposal and make more efficient use of those to cut off illicit trade at its source, to deny access to the tools that these criminals are using and exploiting in order to profit at the expense of legitimate businesses. Doing so is going to require that we use a more data-driven approach that leverages the strengths and insights of stakeholders across the entire trade ecosystem, though. And more to the point, doing so will require breaking down the information silos that Dr. Kennedy referred to in his opening comments. Of course, it's tough to implement a data-driven approach without data. And at present, a lot of the data that's out there and that could be useful, unfortunately, remains segmented. So CBP has some data, trademark owners have data, customs brokers, e-commerce platforms, shipping providers. Everybody may have a piece of the puzzle, but without a means of effectively bringing each of the stakeholders together and leveraging all of their resources and all of their own intelligence, a lot of that data in each individual party's possession isn't particularly useful. There's a lot of work, thankfully, that's being currently ongoing through that's currently ongoing that should help facilitate more robust intelligence sharing, both within the public sector. A good example being the National IPR Coordination Center, who we work closely with, and I believe all of our speakers are well hooked into. Along with cooperation within the private sector, but ultimately we need to find ways of bridging the gaps that currently exist. Getting information from the private sector to the public sector and vice versa, and to ensuring that this sort of information that can be leveraged is getting into the hands of those who can actually make effective use of it. So thanks, Kasie.
Well, thank you, Travis, for those comments and your insights. I think you bring up some really important points, and we'll touch upon them later in the program, especially the issues around small parcels, information sharing, and kind of that lack of data. Really appreciate it. Now we're going to turn the program over to Kasie Smith from the Counterfeit Crimes Unit at Amazon. Thanks, Kasie.
Thank you, Kasie. And first of all, Kasie, thank you to the Congressional E-Commerce Caucus and the Chamber Global IP Center for inviting me and CCU to participate in this discussion. As you mentioned, I lead Amazon's Counterfeit Crimes Unit, and our Counterfeit Crimes Unit is a global team dedicated to pursuing bad actors and holding them accountable to the fullest extent of the law, including working with law enforcement. Our team was established in June of 2020, and we're specifically composed of former federal prosecutors, civil litigators, experienced investigators, data analysts, and others with expertise in catching and prosecuting criminals. For example, as you mentioned, before I joined Amazon, I spent 19 years as a state and federal prosecutor, with the last 3 years with the department's Computer Crime and Intellectual Property section, where I pursued IP infringers from counterfeiters who sold fake iPhones to those who sold fake cancer medicine. And so I understand the need to have enforcement and collaboration, as Travis just mentioned. I think it's important to note that Amazon's primary objective with regard to counterfeit is to ensure that customers never see a listing with a counterfeit or infringing product. And as a result, much of our investment tools deal with technology that are focused on proactive measures that block attempts to open accounts or list counterfeit products. And the vast majority of customers never see a counterfeit when they shop in our store. And if there's something that our teams and technology missed, it is important for the CCU to use those tools, as we mentioned, external enforcement efforts to go against them, both through civil enforcement and/or criminal enforcement. And most of our civil filings to date have been with brands, both large and small, and we're incredibly appreciative of their collaboration. And it's key that we partner with brands as they are the IP owners. So understanding what they know, the unique IP that they're bringing, and our unique data, as Travis mentioned, to bear is crucial. We've worked with global brands like luxury fashion house Valentino and outdoor products designer and retailer Yeti. But it's also important for us to also protect smaller brands who can't protect themselves against these bad actors. And in that lane, we've partnered with brands such as JL Childress, a small family-owned business that delivers travel accessories, and Dutch Blitz. And on the law enforcement side, we build criminal referrals at the state, local, and federal levels, and even with international law enforcement, such as Interpol, Europol, and Chinese law enforcement. We also share data on every confirmed counterfeit with law enforcement so that they can combine the information that we provide them with their intelligence and their on-the-ground efforts. And though most of our criminal investigations are ongoing and we can't discuss them in this presentation, I look forward to talking about our processes and how we can partner with brands to go after bad actors. I'm really excited about this conversation. I want to thank you again for allowing me and the CCU team to participate in this timely discussion.
Well, thank you, Kabru, for the introduction to the Counterfeit Crimes Unit, and thanks for being with us today. Now, really, let's kick off our discussion and have the dialogue around public-private partnerships and really be able to answer some questions and think through some of these thorny questions together. So just the first question to kind of kick off our discussion, really for all of you, why do we need public-private partnerships to address anti-counterfeiting challenges really in the first place? Who wants to kick it off?
I'll take a stab at it. As Dr. Kennedy mentioned, counterfeiting has existed for ages. It's not new, but what we do know is that counterfeiters and criminals writ large are nimble and they're evasive. And in light of the fact that we are looking at counterfeiters who have moved to e-commerce and have followed that trend, we have to find ways, creative ways to collaborate and identify them through law enforcement partnerships, partnerships with brands and stakeholders, and partnerships with e-commerce stores like Amazon. We understand from the Counterfeit Crimes Unit side that counterfeiters are using new and evasive techniques such as falsifying documents, such as identity documents, invoices, using the dark web, and also other evasive methods, including spoofing web pages as if they are a legitimate rights owner. And so for us to have the impact to go at these bad actors in a way that will have an impact, we have to do that through a partnership with brands, rights owners, law enforcement, and e-commerce stores. Just want to use that as a way to kick off the conversation and look forward to discussing that more and how the CCU is uniquely positioned to be flexible and to partner with brands in this space. And we've done that over the past 15 months, and we look forward to doing that with some of the brands that are on the call today.
Thanks, Gabriel. What do you think, Travis? Why do we need public-private partnerships?
Well, I guess two phrases sort of immediately come to mind. And the first is, kind of that truism of, you don't know what you don't know. And, I think we all sort of touched on it in our opening comments. The segmentation of information that's out there has been a sort of a recurring problem, and it's I think historically there's often been a lot of finger pointing of well, why aren't you doing a better job of cleaning up the counterfeits, whether it's fingers being pointed at rights holders and folks saying you should be investing more in enforcement and investigation resources, or e-commerce platforms, or our partners in the public sector themselves, which I think a lot of times is just not very productive. And at the IACC we've had a lot of success working collaboratively with what I would term non-traditional partners, folks who at one time or another we have had some significant disagreements with in terms of policy or practical implementation. I think a good example would be our roadblock program that has been operating. We're coming up on, I believe, our 10-year anniversary, where initially we started having some conversations with the payment sector, the major credit card and money transfer companies, and they made a legitimate point. They had people who were exploiting their legitimate business services, taking advantage of the services that they offer in order to profit from the sale of counterfeit goods. And we found a way of bringing rights holders together with those partners in the payment sector, using the primary source identification and the information that rights holders had already gleaned from their own proactive investigations, getting that information into the right hands, with the partners on the payment side, and allowing them to leverage that information to go through their own system, identify who these bad actors were, and as a responsible member of the trade ecosystem and the e-commerce system, they were more than happy to take action where they were, when they were made aware of it, when they had the ability to identify those bad actors. I mean, the sort of a long-standing concern, across all of the sectors in e-commerce is that counterfeiters tend to do everything they can to take advantage of the anonymity that's available online, to sort of hide in the shadows, and in the case of customs, to hide their needle in the haystack of legitimate trade. I think the opening those lines of communication, though, is really the first step. I think in most cases, we all have a vested interest in keeping the e-commerce and online supply chains clean, sort of consumer trust, and the expectation that you're going to get what you pay for is sort of at the heart or the foundation of e-commerce. So it's bad news for everybody involved if consumers don't trust that they're getting a fair deal, if legitimate online retailers are having to deal with illicit competition or unfair competition from illicit sellers who are duping consumers while offering what appears to be a too good to be true price. So I think we all have a stake in making sure that the system stays clean, and in using the unique abilities and the unique intelligence and information that's available to each of us.
Thank you, Travis. I think we all certainly have a stake in making sure that supply chains stay both secure and clean for the consumer at the end of the day. But thanks for providing some examples too of public-private partnerships that have worked well for the IACC. I wonder, Dr. Kennedy, if you wanted to weigh in on public-private partnerships and some that you've seen from your vantage point, why you think they've been successful, and why from an academic perspective, perhaps they're even more useful in that light.
Sure. So one of the biggest benefits that we see, particularly when we talk about the counterfeiting landscape now, is, as we mentioned before, data and information being siloed and held in different locations. But the technological advances that are driving the e-commerce space generally, outside of counterfeiting, we're going to leave the illicit activity alone. That's entrepreneurial activity that goes on. It's undertaken by private organizations, individuals, firms like Amazon and others, right? They develop this technology for the purpose of legitimate economic interest. That technology gets usurped by the counterfeiters. And so we have this issue where we've got technological development going on that ultimately gets taken over by that actor. And there's this information generation that can occur where we have different people looking at those activities from different perspectives. So the company or the individual who generates a technological solution may not be thinking about its negative or its nefarious consequences or impacts, but others may. And so without having full channels to share information about the risks and the opportunities for deviance, there's no way to design out opportunities for crime. The other thing that's really important when we think about public-private data sharing that I think would be really helpful is when we look at the development of social commerce and the influx of counterfeiters onto social media. My contention is that the biggest changes to counterfeiting the landscape now are going to be socio-technical changes. It's not going to be, a new shift that leads to a physical change. It's going to be the ways in which consumers and brands interact, as well as counterfeiters interact in this space right now that's e-commerce and social media, and then whatever is to come next. So as those new socio-technical applications and products come online, if there are information sharing channels, if there are people that are able to get in input and say, we know this is going to be an opportunity that counterfeiters are going to take advantage of, these are the things we need to be looking for to stay ahead of the game. That risk mitigation stance is the most important part when it comes down to sharing data.
And Kasie, if I may tag along to Dr. Kennedy's last point.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add on two pieces. One, the global nature of commerce, to build on to Dr. Kennedy's point, and the global nature of counterfeiting also contributes and lends to a need to collaborate, partner in every way that we can. Counterfeiters operate without respect for borders, and so as partners, we're going to have to also recognize that we're going to have to collaborate in ways that are cross-border, whether it's through with multinational companies that have a presence all over the world, or law enforcement entities that have an international presence, and organizations that also have that presence that are interested in going after bad actors. That's one piece. And then as it relates to the social media piece, Dr. Kennedy raises an amazing point. We're seeing just new marketplaces or new places where people can buy and move goods. And even within CCU, we've given that an area of focus whereby we're looking at social influencers, social media platforms that are being used to move counterfeit goods. Most recently, our team just settled a lawsuit that involved a number of individuals and businesses who brazenly promoted counterfeit products outside of the Amazon store on both Instagram and TikTok in an attempt to evade our anti-counterfeiting protections. And then when the viewers or followers were directed to an Amazon seller account, they made the purchase and received counterfeit luxury items, right? And so to Dr. Kennedy's point, just the new forms and new ways that people are doing business and communicating, and how that is leading to the proliferation of counterfeits and the movement of counterfeit goods.
Thanks, Kiru. And just while we're on that point, maybe you could provide some insights as to how Amazon and the CCU are also continuing to really disrupt criminal networks. And maybe that's what you were getting at with that recent lawsuit around some of the social media entities. But it seems like when we disrupt criminal entities, it can be for the long term, and that can really impact the public-private partnerships moving forward, because fewer criminal organizations, of course, fewer counterfeiters. Just wondering how you're working with public-private partnerships to think about disruption.
No, great question. And to your point, I mean, our mission is to disrupt and dismantle counterfeit organizations and the networks that support them. And we're not going to really have an impact if we're just doing onesie twosies. And so the purpose of our team is to go with the source, pursue manufacturers and distributors. That means that our team needs to have a presence and an enforcement presence in China, for example. And with that said, as I mentioned, our team is global in nature. We have team members who sit in China, team members who sit in Milan and London and across the United States. And we work with our China team and partner with, for example, Homeland Security in China that's based in Beijing or Guangzhou to provide leads, that those leads are later sent to China Public Security Bureau, for example. We work with our USPTO partners in China as well, with the thought that we want to pursue the source of these counterfeits. And we also pursue the finances, the funds that are being received, the illicit proceeds that are being received by these bad actors, with the purpose and desire, and in some instances, completion of seizing and freezing those counterfeit goods, the illicit proceeds, excuse me. And so our team and our mission is to disrupt and dismantle, either by going at the manufacturers and distributors, the invoice fraudsters and the false identity people who are the fraudsters who are helping support this bad activity, and the logistics networks here in the United States that are transshipping these goods in and around the United States. That's going directly to our mission to disrupt and dismantle these organizations in partnership with law enforcement and brands.
It's hard to talk about dismantling and disruption without really talking about information sharing as well. And I just wonder, Travis, just to think about your perspective, you represent hundreds of brands. Why is information sharing so critical? Why do we need it? And then, of course, how is information used to then build a criminal case from the brand owner's perspective, getting to what Kasie was talking about with the partnerships?
Oh, well, where to begin? It's I think I mentioned a bit, in my, one of my previous responses, one of the biggest challenges that we tend to face is, that, the blind spots or the gaps in the information that we have and the not knowing what we don't know. So, within the private sector, I think this is something that we've, generally had a pretty good awareness of over the years. Joint investigations, enforcement actions, litigation have really been the norm for years. In part, because the same guy who's knocking off my brand is probably doing the same with 24 others. We frequently see counterfeiters who might specialize in a particular product category. But not surprisingly, I suppose brand loyalty isn't really the norm among counterfeiters. So in terms of efficiency, collaborating, with people who might otherwise be your competitors in the legitimate market, absolutely makes sense. And efficiency is vital because limited resources is sort of the name of the game. Even the biggest companies out there, only have, so much funding to work with, only have so much in terms of manpower to work with. And the same is true for law enforcement agencies and prosecutors. So, as a practical matter, a prosecutor probably isn't going to have too much interest in pursuing a low-level misdemeanor, where the offender, at the end of the day, is likely to just get a slap on the wrist, a nominal fine, and not much else. But you start talking, and you might discover, you dig a little deeper, the guy who's selling counterfeit sneakers over here, and the guy who's selling counterfeit handbags at the same flea market, guy selling counterfeit phones at the flea market, might actually be being supplied by the same guy. You follow those initial breadcrumbs back to the warehouse. Your investigation that started, in sort of an independent, solitary fashion, links up with work that one of your colleagues is doing as well. So you team up, execute a raid on the warehouse, and that may lead you to import documents, bills of lading, things of that nature, which lead back to a shipping company. Shipping company in many cases may not be aware that their services were being used to facilitate the illegal activity, might be a little bit aggravated about it, and might be willing to provide some assistance. So you end up with a stack of historical records, and you see that the same importer is bringing in container after container every month over the past 2 years, all with the same description of merchandise, all with the same declared value. Pretty good indicator that this was a long-term ongoing smuggling operation. Maybe you do some open source investigation, you locate some other records, identify some websites connected with the same individuals or the same addresses, the same phone numbers. Again, you can tie in information, as I mentioned, as Kabaru mentioned, in connection with the bank accounts and the credit card merchant accounts behind the individual. At the end of the day, what may have started at an initial review, looking like it was just a minor offender, a small time operation, turns out to be a rather sophisticated criminal network, and that's something that you're not going to discover unless you have these conversations, unless you're identifying common targets and collaborating, sharing information with your counterparts, both in the public and private sector. And those are the sorts of cases that all of a sudden become very interesting to a prosecutor. The impact of pursuing those high level targets, after you have connected the dots, is going to be far more significant than putting a couple of street vendors out of business and seizing maybe a small amount of product. And the penalties that are imposed in those cases are going to be severe enough to strongly encourage those offenders to find another line of work once everything is said and done. But again, in order for those sorts of cases, the big cases, the impactful cases, to be a realistic opportunity, there need to be open lines of communication, both between responsible stakeholders in the private sector and with their counterparts in the public sector.
Well, thanks, Travis. I mean, information sharing clearly is foundational to disruption and dismantling organized criminal networks, but also foundational in us building those criminal cases. I wonder if I could turn to Dr. Kennedy for a moment, just from your perspective and working in the anti-counterfeiting realm for as many years as you have been. During this time of the pandemic, have you seen any major changes related to the counterfeit trade? Is it really, kind of focused on the social media references that you gave us earlier in the program, or have there been other nuances, other changes that you've seen?
Yeah, and so one of the interesting things we saw in the beginning was that counterfeiters were having just as difficult a time getting their goods manufactured and shipped as legitimate manufacturers. But they quickly overcame that hurdle and rebounded very fast. So the social media is probably one that has been the most interesting, not only because of this new form of social commerce and the overlap with things like affiliate marketing and legitimate practice that gets usurped, the use of influencers, as Kabaru has mentioned, right? And these additional veils of legitimacy that counterfeiters try and throw on their schemes so that it's more difficult to understand what's going on or who at least is behind the schemes. But the other thing that's really been interesting to look at is the changing nature of the discussion on social commerce. And one of the things that we've been tracking is the way in which consumers are coming to have different perceptions about counterfeit goods. And so, for example, the AAFA recently released a white paper. We have one that's coming out soon as well that talks about this changing lexicon around counterfeit goods. And so the fact that people were kind of pulled up, at home, the decline of the physical marketplaces and physical malls very much coincided with COVID and then got exacerbated by COVID. The fact that, as I mentioned earlier, people are going online more to buy regulated products, and they're finding that these products are good quality, or at least they're not, failing initially, and they don't perceive them to be an issue. And so these people feel in general more comfortable shopping online. But those consumers who knowingly buy counterfeit goods are finding much higher quality counterfeit goods. And in actuality, what we found is that word counterfeit means like the lowest of the low, right? If you want to rummage through a bin at a flea sale, you can get counterfeits. But if you want to get dupe or rep, this is where you go. And that open sharing of information has led people to feel like, this isn't really that bad, right? Added to one of the things that we looked at called the eat the rich mentality of the Gen Zs fighting back against large corporations and corporate large desks and those types of things. It really has fueled this idea that dupes and reps aren't as bad, right? It's not like a replica is not the same as a counterfeit, right? It's got to be authorized in some way, or at least it functions well and it's not going to fall apart if it falls into water. And counterfeiters are playing up on that, right? And so as much as they can then deceive people into believing they have a certain quality of counterfeit, they are able to sell more product. Or the more that they can get influencers and other individuals to promote their products, the better they are. The other thing that we really need to stay vigilant about is not only the chip shortage, but also the supply chain interruptions that have happened due to COVID. This year is going to be extremely critical. And this is where partners like CCU and Amazon have a huge role to play and can share a ton of data and can really, really be impactful here. People are going to be looking for products that are difficult to find. They're going to go to the places where they know they can generally find products, right? And the problem with a place like an Amazon or an eBay or Wish is somebody says, "Where'd you get that product?" "Oh, I got it off Amazon," right? Although it's a third-party seller that's selling that product, they equate it with the platform, and so that creates a bunch of challenges whereby we ignore the fact that these bad actors are on these platforms and we focus on the platform. We need to really be thinking about the fact that bad actors are taking advantage of this situation, and they will continue to in this upcoming holiday season of legitimate supply chain shortages to thrust counterfeit products in through legitimate places with those veils of legitimacy that will continue to deceive consumers.
Really appreciate you kind of categorizing some of the trends and some of the focus areas that you've witnessed over the past 19 months. It's certainly been eye-opening for all of us who work in the brand protection space to take stock of what criminals are doing, the vulnerabilities that they see in the supply chain, and of course, the disruption that all of us will face with some of our purchasing, especially around that holiday shopping time. At this point, I'd like to invite our audience to go ahead and use the chat function to ask our panelists any questions, anything that might be top of mind for you. We have just about 60 people with us. So if you have any burning questions or anything top of mind, please feel free to go and type it in your chat function, and we'll go ahead and continue the conversation here as you're thinking about some of those questions. I wonder for Travis and for Kibaru, as you're thinking about the pandemic, obviously it had a devastating global impact, but taking stock of all the changes, the new criminal trends, some of the trends and issue areas that Dr. Kennedy was referencing, are there lessons learned from either of your organizations over the last 19 months or so regarding criminal disruption and thinking through investigations and enforcement? Anything that's changed that you wanted to share with this group, or things that you're starting to, kind of tweak just because of the way in which criminals have been pivoting during this time?
Yeah, I'll jump on that. And for me, I'll just say that this has been a fascinating transition because I joined Amazon during the pandemic. And when I joined Amazon, I saw that there were trends that I hadn't seen on the government side. For example, as we just talked about, the social media influence piece, the spoofing of web pages. Also, we're seeing more and more of bad actors sending generic goods into the United States, separate from the actual trademark, to be assembled and then transshipped in the United States at a later point in time, which is a tough one for Customs and Border Protection, because they then have to figure out whether they need to detain that generic good or let it pass to the actual recipient. But one of the biggest lessons for me and our team is just the real impact of data sharing and how we can build on these partnerships. For example, with CCU, we share data with law enforcement and brands when we have identified a counterfeiter. So one example is we turn over data in a quarterly confirmed counterfeit list for all counterfeiters who we identify on the Amazon store. We provide that information to law enforcement in the United States, Europe, China, and that leads to leads for law enforcement partners. The other piece is that when we have a brand that identifies counterfeits, we can have them purchase the counterfeit, and then that leads to a partnership where we can share data in real time. That's been one of the biggest changes that I've seen, whereby e-commerce stores are sharing data with law enforcement and brands with the purpose of being nimble and quick in our approach to going after bad actors. The last piece I would just say is the impact that the lack of some data has on our investigations. Being that Customs and Border Protection is a key partner for all IP investigations, whether it's a civil suit or a criminal suit, missing out on some of the data that Customs seizes when they are, or Customs receives when they are seizing counterfeit goods at our borders. The data that Customs has is so vital to our ability to go after counterfeiters. Earlier in one of our investigations, we received a tip from CBP about a shipment of earbud case covers that resulted in a lawsuit against 13 lawsuits against bad actors who were selling counterfeit Hanes brands. And so just identifying ways to close the data gap is an area of focus that I think we can look to find ways to be more creative in our partnership and reimagine ways that we can partner.
Makes a lot of sense, Kibaru. Travis, do you want to weigh in at all?
Yeah, I would say, I guess, not so much a new lesson that we've learned, but I would say that the past 18 months or so have, absolutely confirmed what we've, been saying for years, and that is, that counterfeiters have literally no regard for the consequences of their actions. And I think Frank alluded to it a little earlier. If they can make a profit by knocking off an item, they're going to do it. So, counterfeit face masks, unlicensed, substandard, entirely fake medicines, absolutely. If people get hurt, if people get sick, they have no concerns in that regard. A great example of the type of information sharing and, cross, sector collaboration that we're talking about today would be Operation Stolen Promise, which was an HSI-led initiative that brought in resources from CBP, Department of Justice, private sector support from Pfizer, 3M. I believe Amazon was a partner in that that operation as well. Through the course of that investigation, I believe they seized somewhere around 13 million counterfeit N95 face masks in fiscal year 2020, over 180,000 prohibited COVID test kits, along with over 40,000 prohibited and fake pharmaceutical products. So we've got a proof of concept. We've got support for taking this sort of approach, and I think that's one of the silver linings of what we've been dealing with the past 18 months, 2 years, is that we're seeing that by being more strategic and being more collaborative in our approaches, we can definitely have a significant impact on the market. With respect to the comments that Kabara was making in connection with getting that data from CBP and the value of being able to have information, whether it's from detentions or seizures, things like that. I would be remiss if I did not mention that there is currently some legislation pending. S1159 was introduced by Senator Grassley, was later rolled into the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act that the Senate passed. I think addresses one of the gaps that are currently in the statutory and regulatory framework, allowing CBP some additional authority to engage in a more robust regime of information sharing and leveraging the assistance of additional industry partners that I for one am very supportive of. So.
Well, thanks, Travis, and thanks for your highlight of Stolen Promise. I think that's just such a great example of U.S. government, putting all their resources together and thinking through things in not only a strategic, but a really creative framework. And we were pleased to be a part of that work too from the Innovation Policy Center. With our 2 minutes left, we do have one question that came in from the audience, and perhaps one of you can answer the question. I think that's all we'll have time for. But their question is, as the leadership of a public-private partnership, he's on board with this strategy. But what do we think about the need to renovate the facilities of international mail facilities? Rather than simply adding more people, perhaps we need to allow the staff to work more efficiently. I wonder, in our 1 minute left, somebody might be willing to answer that question around IMFs.
Well, I will jump in really quick, I guess. I would say, please don't misinterpret my earlier comments about resources, not being the answer to everything. I think in some instances, and the international mail facilities being one of them, for anybody who has taken a tour, it is. I would not ever think to describe it as the most innovative and high-tech facility that you might see in trade operations, either here in the U.S. or elsewhere around the world. I think the frontline folks at CBP do a yeoman's job with the resources they are given. That said, additional resources in modernizing both facilities and equipment technology that's available to them, I think would absolutely enable them to do even more than they currently do. I know there's been a push, and sort of the overlap between the upgraded facilities and improved information sharing. There's a move towards moving to a fully electronic notification of seizure and detention notices to rights holders, and hopefully soon to additional partners as well. That will facilitate a little bit more efficient processing of the illicit goods that are coming through, so that they can be resolved a bit more quickly, and that we can push the numbers up even higher. So.
Thanks, Travis. I think we could continue this conversation for quite some time, perhaps the next hour, since I have many questions to ask of all of you. But perhaps I'll give Kasie a final word, perhaps one final thought that you'd like to leave with the audience, and then the same of Dr. Kennedy before we close our program.
Just want to, underscore our desire collectively from all the panelists and, GIPC to advance the mission of coordination partnership as different industries and different partners. We need to come together to really, cause an impact or bring about a result in this counterfeit enforcement space. At CCU, we are dedicated, interested, and ready to partner with those of you on this call. And if you are interested in partnering with us, you can send us an email at counterfeitcrimes, plural, at amazon.com. If you have a referral, you believe that your goods are being counterfeited or being sold on the Amazon store, and we can find ways to partner with you in either a civil action, a criminal referral, to go after these bad actors and the networks that support them. Look forward to meeting many of you, and thank you again to GIPC for allowing CCU to present on this timely discussion.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for your work and the strong mission of the CCU. Dr. Kennedy, you have a final thought?
Sure. Thanks to the Congressional Caucus and to the GIPC for allowing us to speak. The one thought I would have is that legislation is great. We need the legislation, but we need an oversight framework that will allow us to take a proactive approach to mitigating future risks. So that involves data sharing, that involves putting partnerships together. It involves using legislation as a foundation, but there needs to be a larger organization, a larger infrastructure that supports proactive mitigation of these emerging risks.
Dr. Kennedy, Kivaru, Travis, we're very thankful for your time, for your comments, for your insights, and really for offering a new perspective to so many congressional staff who might not have had the insights or the background on anti-counterfeiting or public-private partnerships. I'm Kasie Brill. I'm from the Global Innovation Policy Center. I really thank you for your time. And now I'd like to turn it over to Frank Cullen, our Vice President of Congressional Affairs and Domestic U.S. Policy, to close out our program. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kasie. Thank you for leading a fascinating discussion. And thanks to all of our panelists for sharing their expertise and insight. We all learned a lot today. We understand that this is a problem that impacts everyone who engages in e-commerce. The threat of counterfeits, not just to the health and safety of American people, but also economic harm, as you mentioned so well at the beginning of our discussion. I want to thank all those who took time to participate in today's event, and we look forward to continuing this important conversation and really trying to do everything we can to stop the scourge of counterfeiting. As we enter this holiday season, many of you will be engaging in e-commerce, and we hope that you have a safe and very fulfilling experience, but be on guard because there are unscrupulous actors, and it's really important that you go to safe sites and that you have an experience that does not expose you or your family to risk. So with that, I want to thank everyone for participating in today's program, and a special thank you to our congressional co-chairs of this important caucus. With that, we appreciate your time and look forward to a continued discussion. Stay well and the best for the upcoming holidays.